Just because I took a little break from uploading does not mean that Kagurabachi has not still been releasing heat chapters. Chapter 34, Duty, is out. Let's go over it. The chapter starts off with a flashback of the Sazanami family asking about their grandfather. Kura Sazanami lets them know that they can no longer see their grandfather because that's what happens when you pass away. We are then informed by Kura that the Sazanami family power, the storehouse, gets passed down through each patriarch. We are also informed that the first patriarch ever was the person to obtain this power and who is able to pass it down to the future generation of the Sazanami. This power is protected by each Sazanami leader and passed down once their duty is up in order to uphold the Sazanami family and its name and the Rakuzachi auction. Now, normally people cannot pass down sorcery, but because of the Sazanami family and the first patriarch, this is possible with them only. And it is because pretty much it's the Sazanami family. It's in their blood, and Kira Sazanami kind of tries to sell it off as love or their bond. He says to the children that as long as they're bonded, they can never be separated, and grandfather is watching from afar too. And then we get this like really heartwarming moment from Kira Sazanami, which I want to remind you guys that is completely manipulation. He really does not have too much care for these children. He sees them more as tools, but the yearning that they have for the love of their father makes this so interesting as a panel. And now we are back to Shoya being locked in pretty much when ending Hakuri completely right after Chihiro just arrived to save him. Hakuri lets Chihiro know that he should go on ahead because he plans on handling this here. Thinking back to all of his memories, he understands that he has to do this alone and he has to put his life on the line to settle this once and for all. Moving back over to Mr. Shiba, he's fighting against Tenri, who has manifested this jellyfish through the Datanseki stone that Kyora Sazanami sent to him via the storehouse. And this gives him a massive power up, almost speed blitzing Mr. Shiba, catching him a little off guard. Mr. Sheba's able to teleport behind him, and we see Tenri kind of losing his mind, yelling, "Don't touch him." He spins around, blasting another Iso at him. He manages to easily dodge that as well. The other Sazanami siblings think to themselves that he wasn't able to teleport and that they might be able to overwhelm Mr. Shiba and actually get the upper hand. And they plan on doing just that. Kura is also sending them weapons from the storehouse to combat against Mr. Shiba. And just as Tenri launches all these weapons, Hakuri calls out for Yue and saves Mr. Shiba in perfect timing. We even see it here with Chihiro asking him how his timing is, and Mr. Shiba lets him know that it's absolutely perfect. Pretty much here, we are getting a rundown from Mr. Shiba and Chihiro's perspective about everything that's happening. Mr. Shiba asks Chihiro if he's able to still use the Cloud Gouger. He lets him know that he is, and Mr. Shiba also lets him know about Tenri using the Datsenseki Stone, and he's able to now hold on to what seems like some enchanted blade power. It is also important to note that Chihiro says that he can only use Mei full on like 1.5, 1.7 more times. And also in this panel, Mr. Shiba reiterates the fact that there's no real way to control Datanseki without the enchanted blades, which inevitably means that Tenri is going to lose his life at the end of whatever power boost he's getting. And we have Chihiro trying to do that, reach out to Tenri. He says, "You're Tenri, right? Hakuri's little brother. Do you not understand the side effects of using the Datanseki?" And Tenri says that he has to fulfill his duty. We get Chihiro thinking about Hakuri's memories, about talking about how the Sazanami is an awful family, and how he also thinks back to his father and their blacksmithing work. And after that thought, Mr. Shiba suggests that Chihiro and him back off for the time being till the Datanseki runs out. Chihiro decides that it is too late for him and he will face him head on and give him an honorable death. And for our last pages, we actually get a double spread of Hakari and Shoya both clashing with Isos. Continuing in fashion with my Kagurabachi catch up, chapter 35 Cages Out. You better believe we're going to go over it. This chapter focuses on Hakuri and it starts off with a flashback to August of this year, which is something that we should keep in mind, and I will go over why in a little bit. But we find out that in another warehouse several hundred meters away from the Sazanami residence, merchandise is held separately in a different storehouse, a physical one. And we find there that Hakuri was trusted with a job. We then see Hakuri talking with a girl in a cage with icy skin. He mentions that she hasn't eaten a little bit and she's going to die if she does not eat something. She lets him know that she doesn't care and that she'd rather die than live the disgusting life that she's currently living or being sold by lowlives. Hakuri lets her know that it's not up to her, and he calls her valuable merchandise that needs to eat for the Rakuzachi's sake. A couple of things I want to address. Hakuri is supposed to be an asshole in this chapter. He's not a good person up until this point. He still kind of has the Sazanami pressure, still pressuring him down and making all of his decisions for him. So keep that in mind as we go ahead. Hakuri lets her know that in a couple weeks she'll be transferred to the real storehouse in preparation for the auction. So no matter what, he won't let her die, whether that be that he has to force her to eat by harm or any other means. She says that meals are supposed to be enjoyed with other people. Hakuri rebuttals that by saying that she knows that she has to stay in confinement because her body always radiates the cold, and if she's in a space with other people, she will harm them. She says that she's not asking to be let out of confinement. She's simply asking that Hakuri enjoy a meal with her. And enjoying the meal with somebody might make her actually be able to hold the meal down. During their meal, Hakuri is asked by the ice girl what happened to his hand, and we are led on to believe that Shoya, while he has been beating Hakuri up, is also torturing Hakuri with tools. But for the most part, after he uses a tool on Hakuri, he ends up losing it. But shortly after he loses it, he goes back to his normal means. The ice girl asks if he iced it properly and asks for his hand. Then she obviously radiates some kind of ice and kind of helps soothe it. She comes to the conclusion that Hakuri's job and punishment was being made to watch the ice girl. They're both rejects, and she can sympathize with him because of this. She asks if they can escape together, but Hakuri declines, saying that she is trying to trick him. She actually does sympathize with him, but she's saying that she can teach him things about the outside world. She also tells Hakuri to keep it in mind just in case he does end up having a change of heart. But then we see Hakuri pushing back on that again, saying, "Don't get carried away. We're not equals here. He's the merchant and she's merchandise." We even see Ice Girl kind of rebuttaling his resolve, saying, "Even though your own family bullies you, this is still the way you think." And he's saying it's all for the Rakuzachi's sake, all for the Sazanami's sake. It's his own fault for being so useless, seeing how the Sazanami family and this hierarchy has really oppressed him. More time goes on. She starts to actually finish her meals and is continuously, talking with Hakuri throughout these meals, healing him with her ice powers. And Hakuri is really glad for this, for the Rakuzaki's sake, and to be useful to his family. One day, Hakuri comes back a little later than usual. She asks what happens, but Hakuri says it just took a little longer than usual. He also lets her know that it is her last day in this storehouse, and soon she will be transported to the other storehouse where the auction will be taking place from. Then we see Hakuri breaking down, saying that he can't do his ESO, he's still useless to the Sazanami family, and we see Ice Girl sympathizing with him more, saying, "You poor thing." He's wondering why she has such sympathy for him because she's the one imprisoned in the cage. She's the one about to be given up for auction. And we see the theme of value and merchandise being brought up a lot, and Hakuri is questioning that exactly. What value does he have? What space does he hold within the Sazanami family if he can't even do the things that are traditional to them right? And Ice Girl lets Hakuri know that he's valuable to her. She's been enjoying the meals the time that they've been there and been actually able to eat. This, all in all, gives Hakuri a change of heart. He gets the keys out to open the cage because he's planning to run away with her. He's had a change of heart. He's basically been won over by Ice Girl, and he's ready to escape the Sazanami life. We then get a flashback to Shoya and Hakuri in their current battle. Shoya has blasted him again with another Iso, and Hakuri is laying on the ground, bloody and bruised. Shoya is basically saying that Hakuri should lose his life while he's still lovable and while he still has some kind of value. Going back in the past to Ice Girl and Hakuri, which is all happening throughout what seems like a flashback during his fight with Shoya, she ends up getting out of the cage and finds a knife, and she calls it merchandise. She holds it up to her neck, obviously planning to end her own life, and Hakuri is trying to talk her out of it. She let them know from the beginning this was her plan to take her own life. She said the person that she originally fell in love with ended up selling her because of the same things that Hakuri had said. Her skin hurts people, and she is only looked at as a tool. Hakuri's begging and pleading falls on deaf ears as she ends her own life, saying that even outside of the cage, there was no hope for her. And this moment kind of puts Hakuri into a breaking point. He thinks about all the things he had originally said to her, talking about value, speaking to her as only an object, These things are really wearing down his mental, obviously, as it would in being a very traumatic experience, especially after he has just had this change of heart where he understands that he really killed her, where she was looking for comfort one last time and might have been able to have a change of heart. Hakuri deeper solidified that in her. And partially his fault, partially not, due to the whole Sazanami trauma and everything. But all in all, he contributes what he did to her as ending her life. Then we cut back to Shoya hitting Hakuri with one last Iso, leaving him on the ground. And just like that, as Shoya is walking away, one of the tools that he used to use on Hakuri ends up popping up. And we see embers of spirit energy flowing from Hakuri's eye. As for additional analysis, these two chapters, chapter 34 and 35, being so heavily centered around the Sazanami brothers, 34 being focused on Tenri and 35 being focused on Hakuri, also adds to just the amount of enjoyment in these chapters, especially with the character analysis and finally giving us what feels like fleshed out full story from these characters that we've had pieces from and that we've been able to infer things about their character from. I'm going to talk a little bit about chapter 35 before I go back to chapter 34, which focuses a little bit more on Tenri. Chapter 35 is probably my favorite chapter regarding anything with Hakuri. I think that for such a short series to have such well written characters, especially being displayed in a chapter like chapter 35, is like almost unheard of. Like, I don't think we're giving Hokuzono enough flowers here for the level of writing that is going into this story. That is a shonen, that is a power shonen, that has these fantastic, extravagant fights. Like, the characters in this are insane. There's a lot of things that Hokuzono does in his writing that makes it very special. One of the things is the perception of time. The perception of time is really prevalent in the story of Kagurabachi, and I can always appreciate that because you look at the beginning of chapter 35, it makes remark that this is at in August earlier in the year. So Hakuri leaving the Sazanami family and deciding to run away was relatively recent, especially when lined up in time with him being saved by Chihiro, meeting Chihiro, and then coming back to the Sazanami residence to destroy the auction. It's all relatively recent in time, and I can appreciate any series that gives us an accurate timeline on things. Like we know, oh, this fight lasted 90 seconds. Oh, this happened 6 months prior to the current event that's going on. Oh, this has been 7 months since this injury healed. So this is like how the time changed. This is how the characters changed. This is what they might have learned, and this is what they possibly will learn. Especially regarding things like powers. If there ever needs to be training, like okay, 3 months passed, he probably has a little bit more spirit energy or something of that sort. So I can always appreciate that. This chapter thematically also was really special. When you talk about things like merchandise, when you talk about things like value, both are very detrimental parts to Hakuri's story. And now we understand why through this, nameless character who is given so much meaning to Hakuri's resolve. For a lot of stories, food is a big symbolism, but Hokuzono specifically loves using food in his story to convey whatever message it is currently going on, right? Uh, Even if you take an example, like a simple example from like the icy girl not being able to enjoy her meals, which is why she wouldn't eat. Like, could you imagine, being locked away, being prepared to be sold for auction? You can't even enjoy a simple thing like enjoying a meal. I think that was what brings so much easy camaraderie, and it is so palatable for us as viewers to understand how two people could bond over just meals. Backtracking again to the topic of valuableness and being merchandise, I really love how the entire chapter comes basically full circle from Hakuri originally placing this inherent value on what we would call an object at this point, to fully having this change of heart and that same morality that the Sazanami was oppressing and pushing into Hakuri ultimately ends up, destroying the life. And I think that also just speaks volumes to uh, the tradition and also like the lore of the Sazanami family. I'm really impressed with how, in such short time, the structure of the Sazanami family has been laid in such a way that makes stuff like this so meaningful. Of course, it is important to Hakuri's story, but it would still also be sad if, Hakuri didn't have that change of heart. If this was just a character that we saw, and we can infer that almost all of the other characters, who end up being auctioned, who end up being sold off, are going through something similar to this experience, and it almost feels hopeless for all of them, which is like also a tantamount to just why Hakuri's going so hard for the reason he is. It's not just that this specific moment. He's been feeling this entire time, and there's nothing wrong with how Hakuri has been feeling. It's just now somebody has made it able for him to be okay being himself, and I love that. Another thing that I also found interesting in chapter 35 is that Shoya is talking all of this, bravado about ending Kakuri's life, but it seems to me as though he doesn't really want to. He's kind of just trying to push to a point where he breaks his soul, being the fact that he just keeps hitting him with Isos. Yes, Iso is their, sorcery. It is very detrimental, but he's not finishing the job, if that makes sense. He kind of leaves it up in the air from that point, and then we get that cliffhanger of Hakuri getting what looks like, the Sazanami mask on his eye. But I think that's enough for that chapter. Going back a chapter to what is that, 34, that focuses more on Tenri, I find that that chapter is also very interesting in its own way. Like I said, with Hokazono and writing characters, he is giving a lot of depth to a lot of these characters. Obviously, they're all relevant, obviously they're all relevant to the story, but the specific care that he's taking for these characters is really appreciative, especially Tenri being kind of that counterpart to Hakuri. You see a lot, like Kura Sazanami is very manipulative. That is kind of the whole Sazanami way. All the kids really want, even up to Shoya, is respect and love from their father, which leads to Tenri doing something that ultimately will give up his life. What I'm referring to is him using the Datanseki stone, which is also very interesting in itself because it leaves a lot of leeway from Mr. Hishiku, the leader who killed Chihiro's father, helping behind the scenes with Kura Sazanami for potential other weapons or potentially different ways that Datanseki can be harvested and used without one costing a life, but also without having an enchanted blade, since Chihiro's father was the only person who could do that. I think that it is also interesting that Datanseki tends to manifest itself similar to I can't really think of a kind of a comparison, but it kind of has like an affinity to the person. Like Tenri's is a jellyfish, which I think is a really interesting character given Tenri's personality and given him his backstory. It fits him so well. It leaves a lot of things up in the air and a lot of interesting possibilities for the future, especially when we see that all of the villains in the story have a heavy hand in trying to cultivate some weapon out of Datanseki, similar to how Chihiro's father once did. Touching back on the Datanseki stone and possibilities, it also really seems like that is a path that Hokazono really wants to go down. So I would say that it wouldn't be ridiculous to see a lot more people with Datanseki stones of some sort, getting power ups and getting manifestations through Datanseki, leading into a bunch of different spirit animals. Chihiro has the fish. And we might even see Hakuri get something of the sort, and Tenri with the jellyfish. I think that's just one of the very first introductions that Hokazono has, and it's very well received. I'm super excited to see what else goes on there. There are also a bunch of other things that I could talk about in Hokazono's work, which I don't think I will add here, but it's just a lot of things like the symbolism, like the metaphors, like the panel transitioning, and just like what seems to be a different layer from what we're used to for most shonen. I'm so glad it got memed into the spotlight it did, because it really is a special story, especially this far in. There's what, 38, 39 chapters I think dropped as of today, and I don't think I've seen a story within 40 chapters do what Hokazono was doing with Kagurabachi. it's something special. I think that's going to be it for this analysis. I do have another chapter, or I have all the chapters coming out right after this one. So if you enjoy Kagurabachi, stick around and wait for those uploads. I appreciate everybody stopping by, and make sure to give us a subscribe. We're on the road to 300. Hopefully, we can hit that soon, man. Take care.